The sun had barely begun to rise when Jacob Miller stepped out of his small, run-down apartment. His back ached, a constant reminder of his years in the military, and his old boots scraped against the cracked pavement as he made his way to the bus stop. Life hadn't been easy since returning home. The war had taken a part of him, but civilian life had stolen even more. Jobs were scarce, bills piled up, and his old Chevy had broken down months ago. Without a car, even getting to work had become a battle. Jacob worked at a local hardware store, spending hours on his feet, lifting heavy boxes, and doing his best to ignore the pain in his knees. But he never complained. That wasn't his way. He had survived worse. His only dream now was to make it through each day, one shift at a time, one bus ride at a time. But this morning was different. Today, the store manager had gathered everyone for an announcement. "We have a special guest dropping by today," he said, smiling in a way that made Jacob suspicious. "I want everyone on their best behavior." Jacob shrugged. It didn't matter to him. Celebrities and rich folks had no business in places like this. They lived in a different world, one he would never understand. A few hours later, a buzz of excitement filled the store. People whispered and pointed. Phones were raised, cameras flashing. That's when Jacob saw him. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, walking through the aisles like a giant among men, shaking hands, flashing that famous smile. Jacob turned back to his work, stacking boxes onto shelves. He didn't have time for this. "Hey, brother." The voice was deep, warm, familiar. Jacob turned and found himself staring up at the man himself. Dwayne Johnson stood before him, his hand extended. Jacob hesitated, then took it. The handshake was strong, reassuring. "I heard about you, man," Dwayne said. "Your service, your hard work. You're a hell of a guy." Jacob forced a smile. "Just doing what I gotta do." Dwayne studied him for a moment, then glanced at the old bus schedule sticking out of Jacob's pocket. He nodded as if making a decision. "Come with me," he said. Jacob frowned. "Why?" Dwayne just grinned. "Trust me." Jacob hesitated. He wasn't used to favors, and he sure as hell wasn't used to trusting strangers, even if that stranger was Dwayne Johnson. But there was something in the way he said it. Something steady, certain, like a man who meant what he said. With a tired sigh, Jacob wiped his hands on his worn-out jeans and followed. The store was buzzing with excitement. Employees and customers watched with wide eyes, whispering among themselves. Dwayne led Jacob outside, past the parking lot, to where a sleek black pickup truck was parked near the curb. It was brand new, gleaming under the sun, looking completely out of place in front of the worn-down storefront. Dwayne turned to Jacob, leaning against the truck with his arms crossed. "I heard you've been having a rough time," he said. Jacob frowned. "Who told you that?" "Let's just say some good people wanted to make sure you got the respect you deserve." Dwayne paused, watching Jacob carefully. "You served this country, gave everything, and now you're out here busting your ass every day just to get by. That doesn't sit right with me." Jacob shifted uncomfortably. He wasn't looking for pity. "Life's tough," he muttered. "I ain't special." Dwayne chuckled. "You're damn special, brother. And today, I want to do something for you." He pulled a set of keys from his pocket and held them out. "This truck? It's yours." Jacob blinked. His brain refused to process the words. "What?" "You heard me," Dwayne said, grinning. "This truck is yours. No strings, no payments. Just to thank you for everything you've done." Jacob stared at the keys. His hand shook. His chest felt tight, like all the air had been sucked out of his lungs. I can't accept this," he whispered. "Yeah, you can," Dwayne said firmly. "And you will." Jacob swallowed hard. His pride screamed at him to say no, to walk away, to keep struggling like he always had. But for the first time in years, Someone was reaching out. Not out of pity, but out of respect. His vision blurred, his throat burned. Dwayne put a hand on his shoulder. "Take the damn keys, brother." Jacob took them, and his legs nearly gave out beneath him. Jacob gripped the keys in his trembling hands, staring at them like they weren't real. His heart pounded in his chest, his mind racing. This couldn't be happening. It didn't make sense. I don't know what to say," he finally choked out. His voice was raw, barely above a whisper. Dwayne smiled, that familiar confident grin. "You don't have to say anything, man. Just know that you deserve this." Jacob's knees felt weak. He had spent years fighting, struggling, barely scraping by. He was used to hardship, used to things falling apart. But this was something good, something beyond anything he could have imagined. People were watching, some recording, others just standing there, holding their breath. But Jacob barely noticed them. He looked at the truck. Shiny, powerful, perfect. His old Chevy had been a rusted-out mess, coughing black smoke every time he turned the key. He had spent more money fixing it than he had on food some months. And when it finally died, he had let it go without a fight, too exhausted to care. But now, here he was, standing in front of a brand-new truck. "I don't know how to repay you," he said, voice cracking. Dwayne's smile softened. "You don't have to." Jacob exhaled sharply, a mix of laughter and disbelief. He wiped at his face, realizing too late that his eyes were wet. Damn it. He hadn't cried in years, not through the pain, not through the nights he spent alone, wondering how he'd keep going. But now, standing here with a stranger who had just changed his life, the weight of everything finally broke through. Dwayne patted his shoulder. "Come on, man, let's take it for a spin." Jacob hesitated before nodding. His hands still shook as he reached for the door handle. The second he slid into the driver's seat, he felt the leather beneath his fingertips, smelled the new car scent. He ran his hands over the steering wheel, barely believing this was real. Dwayne climbed into the passenger seat, grinning. "How's it feel?" Jacob took a deep breath. "Like I don't deserve it." Dwayne turned to him, serious now. "You do." Jacob swallowed hard and turned the key. The engine roared to life, smooth and powerful. For the first time in a long time, something in his chest felt lighter. He wasn't alone. Jacob gripped the steering wheel tightly, feeling the truck's raw power humming beneath his fingertips. It was surreal. For years, he had relied on his own 2 feet, city buses, and the kindness of strangers for rides. Now, he had something of his own, something he never thought he'd have again. He glanced over at Dwayne, who was watching him with that same easygoing smile. "Go on," Dwayne said. "Take it down the road." Jacob hesitated, then nodded. He shifted into drive, easing onto the street. The truck moved like a dream, smooth and powerful, nothing like the rickety old cars he had driven before. His hands stopped shaking as he focused on the road, on the feeling of control, of freedom. Dwayne sat back, arms crossed, watching Jacob. "Feels good, huh?" Jacob exhaled, shaking his head. "Man, you have no idea." "Oh, I think I do," Dwayne said. "I grew up watching my old man struggle to keep a car running. I remember what it was like, not knowing if we'd make it to the next paycheck. When you don't have a ride, it makes everything harder." Jacob nodded. "Yeah, you start planning your life around bus schedules, walking for miles just to get to work. And when something goes wrong, you're screwed." Dwayne sighed. "That's why I wanted to do this. A car's not just a car, it's a way forward, and you deserve that, brother." Jacob tightened his grip on the wheel. He had spent so long fighting to survive, just keeping his head above water. He had never expected anyone to see him, to recognize the weight he carried. But Dwayne had. The street stretched out ahead of him, wide and open. For the first time in years, he didn't feel trapped. A lump formed in his throat, but he swallowed it down. "I don't know how to thank you." Dwayne laughed. "Just drive, man, that's all the thanks I need." Jacob pressed the gas pedal a little harder, feeling the wind rush past the open windows. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel stuck. For the first time in a long time, he felt free. Jacob drove in silence for a few moments, letting the reality of it all sink in. The truck felt unreal beneath his hands, like something borrowed or temporary, something that could be taken away at any second. But it wasn't. It was his. His throat felt tight, but he fought through it. He wasn't the kind of man who cried in front of others. He had learned long ago to swallow his struggles, to keep moving forward no matter how much life tried to break him. But today, something cracked open inside him. He glanced over at Dwayne, who was watching him with an easy patience, like he understood exactly what was happening without a single word being spoken. Jacob cleared his throat. "You didn't have to do this, man." Dwayne shook his head. "I did." Jacob frowned. "Why?" Dwayne sighed and looked out the window for a moment as if gathering his thoughts. "Because I know what it's like to struggle. And because guys like you get forgotten. You come back from serving and people shake your hand, say, 'Thank you for your service,' and then move on. Meanwhile, you're left to figure everything out on your own." Jacob clenched his jaw. He knew that truth too well. He had given years of his life to his country, to something bigger than himself. And yet, when he came back, the world didn't slow down for him. It didn't wait. It just kept moving forward, whether he could keep up or not. "No one owes me anything," Jacob muttered, gripping the wheel a little tighter. "Maybe not," Dwayne said, "but that doesn't mean you don't deserve a little help." Jacob exhaled slowly, his mind still spinning. He had spent so long being self-sufficient, refusing to ask for anything, refusing to let himself need anyone. But now, sitting in this truck, his truck, he felt something shift deep inside him. Maybe it was okay to accept kindness. Maybe it was okay to believe that some people still cared. He pulled into a quiet parking lot and put the truck in park. For a long moment he just sat there, running his hand over the dashboard, over the steering wheel, still trying to convince himself this was real. Dwayne clapped him on the shoulder. "Enjoy it, brother. You earned it." Jacob swallowed hard and nodded. "Yeah, I think I finally believe that." Jacob sat in the driver's seat for a long time, fingers tracing the smooth leather of the steering wheel. The truck smelled new, felt new, but what shook him the most was that it was his. It wasn't borrowed, wasn't temporary. This was real. Dwayne leaned back in the passenger seat, watching Jacob carefully, like he was waiting for something. Jacob finally let out a breath and turned to him. "I don't know how to accept this." His voice was rough, hesitant. "I've spent my whole life fighting for everything. It's hard to just take." Dwayne nodded, his expression serious. "I get that. But listen, man, this isn't charity, this isn't some random act of kindness, this is respect. It's appreciation. It's me saying thank you in a way that actually matters." Jacob looked down at the keys in his hand. He thought about the nights he had spent wondering how he'd make it to work the next day, the exhaustion of long walks and waiting in the cold for buses that sometimes never came. The world had moved on without him after he left the military, and he had been trying to catch up ever since. And now, for the first time in years, he felt like he wasn't falling behind. He nodded, swallowing down the lump in his throat. "I won't waste it." Dwayne grinned. "I know you won't." Jacob exhaled sharply, shaking his head in disbelief. "Damn, man, you really just give away cars like this?" Dwayne chuckled. "Not every day, but when I hear about someone like you, someone who's done everything right and still can't catch a break, yeah, I do what I can." Jacob turned to him, the weight of everything pressing into his chest. "This changes everything for me." "I hope so," Dwayne said, clapping him on the shoulder. And I hope you remember that you're not invisible, brother. People see you. I see you." Jacob's jaw clenched as he nodded. Those words hit harder than he expected. For so long, he had felt like the world had forgotten him, like his struggles didn't matter. But here was someone proving him wrong. He turned the key again, listening to the smooth rumble of the engine. He had a way forward now, a new beginning. And for the first time in a long time, Jacob Miller allowed himself to believe in something good. Life is full of unexpected moments, and sometimes a single act of kindness can change everything. Jacob's story isn't just about receiving a truck. It's about reminding us that people still care, that respect still exists, and that no one should be forgotten. If this story moved you, imagine how many others out there need to hear it. So hit that subscribe button. Not because I said so, but because stories like this deserve to be told. What's the greatest act of kindness you've ever witnessed? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Let's keep the conversation alive. Blast off